Welcome back. Cape Town Mayor Geordin Hill-Lewis says he wants to change the way in which the Metro deals with the homeless population. In the past, the city of Cape Town has been criticized for how it deals with people who live on the street there. In fact, activist organization Difuna Ukwazi has taken the DA-led Metro to court on several occasions about the issue. Let's speak to the Executive Mayor Geordin Hill-Lewis, who's joining us from Cape Town, I believe. Mayor, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to the program. So you want to change the approach in dealing with homelessness to one of care and compassion. How would you do that?
We've started, Tembekile, and it's good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation. We've started with the significant, huge expansion of what we call our safe spaces, which are essentially shelter beds that the city of Cape Town runs ourselves, giving warm meals, constant medical attention, job placement programs, a place to sleep, a place to store your personal belongings. We have expanded those in the last couple of weeks at our first Culemborg site by 150 beds. We've got another one that's about to start construction where there will be another 200 beds. And we've identified sites for 3 others around the city that will start building soon. And so there will be a big expansion in the availability of shelter space. Just for this winter, because we knew that it would take some time to build those, we've given 10 million rand to local shelters to expand their bed spaces. Those are run by NGOs and church groups and religious groups and so on, so that they can expand their bed space. At the moment, as we speak, every single person is getting a personal visit from one of our social development workers to do a personal assessment. Do they need addiction treatment? Do they need mental health care? So that we can try and help people off the streets as much as possible. We can help them get ID books so that they can access social grants. We can help them get job placement into an EPWP job and really try and get them into one of our safe spaces. So always constantly trying to lead with how can we help to care for this person and help to get them off the street with a caring intervention.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of response then, how many of the people who sadly live on the streets in Cape Town have come forward and taken you up on this offer?
Well, that's a great point, because unfortunately in many times these offers to help are rebuffed, they're rejected. There's lots of reasons for that. Obviously we cannot allow drug use openly at our safe spaces, and most of the shelters don't allow drug use at their shelters either. So that's often a reason. Previously, we heard that because there was no couples accommodation, people had to sleep separately as men and women. That was a major reason. But in our new safe spaces, we are actually building dedicated couples accommodation so that people can stay in our safe spaces as couples. So hopefully that begins to address that. But ultimately, I think it's important to say, Tebekile, that if all of these care interventions are rejected, then there is still a legal process that we have to follow. It's not right to let someone simply remain on the street forever. It's undignified, it's unsafe, it's very unhealthy. It's not to say that we are absolutely removing the legal recourse. We are just trying to say, are there a whole number of other steps defined by care interventions that we can do before we get to that space?
So let's talk about Cape Town, because Cape Town has been criticized in the past for its handling of the people who live on the streets there. People have said Cape Town has in the past been anti-poor, anti the homeless. Would you agree then, and that is why you've decided to bring about this change?
No, I don't agree with that characterization at all. I think that if you look at what happens in other cities around South Africa, there's homeless people ordinarily just almost on a daily basis get removed without any legal blockage whatsoever, without any court stopping them. There is a much more deeply entrenched and more activist culture towards protection of homeless people and their rights and their interests in Cape Town than there is anywhere else in South Africa. And that has meant that previously, when the city has tried to intervene in public spaces that are being taken over with tented camps and so on, they have often run up against court interdicts, against activist organizations like you've mentioned. But that doesn't mean that the city has been uncaring. It's an incredibly complex space. It is absolutely not a simplistic thing to deal with. There are lots of people who need real medical attention in terms of addiction treatment, in terms of untreated mental health disorders. Those are things that should be picked up by other aspects of the state, by the health department, and it's not being picked up there. And then the city has to try and deal with the issue on the street.
Not anti-poor, but why was the city's previous approach lacking care and compassion then? Because that's what you want to inject into the solution going forward.
There was a whole ladder of failures in society. There was poverty, there was lockdown, there's huge drug addiction and substance abuse. And the city sits with this crisis at the end of that ladder of failures. And the only mechanism that we've had in the past to deal with it was law enforcement. But you cannot police your way out of this crisis of homelessness in South Africa. You've got to, for a long time, there was disputes between which level of government must take responsibility for this, who must build shelters, who must pay for this, is it a mental health issue, and so on. And so the change that I'm saying is that we've got to take the bull by the horns and say we will build those shelter spaces. If necessary, we'll provide the access to health care at a primary basis. If necessary, we'll do what we need to do to help get people off the streets. That's not going to make up for all of those other things like mental health care, which still needs a lot of attention in South Africa. But it does take the emphasis away from just trying to police this issue, which is not working. Anyone who drives around the streets of South African cities will show you this is a really very significant problem. It is very multifaceted and complex. But we are not going to just sit around and say, well, it's too difficult. There's nothing we can do about it. We are trying to do something about it. I'm not sure whether it will be as successful as I hope it will be, but at least we are trying to push the ball, get the issue moving forward again, whereas it's really just been in neutral for the last few years.
Will you stop then fining the homeless in the city of Cape Town? Because that's one of the other issues where you've clashed with the likes of Ndifuna Ugwazi in Cape Town.
No, well, I repeat what I said earlier. If all of our efforts to help are rejected, then public spaces have to remain open for public use. It cannot be acceptable that public spaces, roads and road reserves and parks and so on become taken over by these tent establishments, tent structures, and all of your efforts to help and offer alternative accommodation are just rejected. Then you have to go, there has to be legal recourse to protect those public spaces and to make, plug people into those care interventions so that they can try to reintegrate, get off the streets and get back to their families. So I'm not ruling out the legal recourse at all. In fact, I strongly believe that in many cases where all of this help is rejected, that still will be necessary. But it is my sincere hope that in a lot more cases, this help will be accepted and that people will voluntarily leave the streets because we are making all of those provisions that I've spoken to you about earlier available to them to help.
So this care, and I repeat this because this is what the quote that I read from you, the care and compassion, of course, applies if you take up the offer as a homeless person in Cape Town.
Exactly, and we are trying to address the concerns. As I said, if you have a concern that there's no couples accommodation available, we're addressing that. We cannot address the concern around being allowed to use drugs inside a shelter. We cannot allow criminal activity inside a state facility. That's never going to be allowed. There might be some other private organizations that allow that. I don't know, but that's never going to be allowed in a city-run facility. So where we can address those concerns and offer the help that you need, a nurse on duty all the time, hot meals, warm water and toilet facilities, a place to store your belongings, all of that. If all of that is still rejected, then we absolutely have to have some legal recourse to say this is still a public space and it has to be available for public use, and this is not safe or dignified for the person living on the street either.
I want to ask you then more broadly about the housing issue. I mean, if you're going to be assisting the poor and the homeless in terms of getting housing, Cape Town, like various other parts of the country, already has a housing backlog, right? Yes, you're also going to develop, you say, affordable housing options for the people. But how soon would you be able to get, let's say, the first person who'd been living on the streets because of whatever circumstances into a unit, given how long the waiting list already is?
Okay, so let's just differentiate between shelter accommodation. That is already up and running. We've expanded by 150 beds already, and I've said that there's 3 or 4 more new facilities coming up very shortly. So there will be many, many more spaces available. But that is not a house. It's a shelter. It's not a kind of private your own home. There we are trying to accelerate what I call affordable housing land release using city land, making it available as much as possible and as quickly as possible for social housing development. Now, there's a whole lot of pieces of land that have honestly snail-paced, inched their way through the system the last few years. And in the last 6 months, I've been giving a lot of attention to how do we speed up those pieces of land to deliver them for social housing development. Last month, we released 2 of them. And those are now going through the process to start construction. And I don't want to give too much away, but at the end of July, at our next council meeting, we will process a 3rd one, which is a really, really significant one, a big one. These have not gone through the system at all until we have paid some special focus and attention to get them through the system the last few months.
And I was asking the housing question, Mayor, because as things stand, I mean, there's a worsening cost of living crisis. People are likely to lose work, possibly, if companies redraw their budgets and decide to cut staff. And Cape Town is one of the areas where people go to find work. And sadly, they may find themselves being in a situation where they have no place to stay or having to make such significant cuts that low-cost housing is their only option. And that is why I was asking about how prepared you would be to make those provisions.
Quite right. My commitment is I really want to see this pipeline of properties that are available for social housing development sped up and expanded much quicker. And I'm working with my team almost on a daily basis talking about this as an issue. And my hope is that in the months ahead, you will start to see a steady drumbeat of pieces of big parcels of land in well-located parts of the city released for social housing development in Cape Town.
Geordin Hill-Lewis, Executive Mayor of the City of Cape Town. Good to have your time, sir. Thank you.